Welcome to the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast. Coming right up, fresh tips and insights from lodging professionals aimed at helping you improve your business. Our podcast is brought to you by the Frictionless Guest App, which helps improve your guest stay without adding more to your day. Learn how at frictionlessguest.com.
All right, Steve. So we have a podcast here today with Valerie Stimac, who is a travel blogger with Valerie Valise. And she is talking with us about how lodging professionals and providers can work with travel influencers. We've never covered this before.
Yeah, I'll give you an audio feel for me right now. Oh, that's the sound of my head blowing up because there was just so much stuff that we had to cover. New stuff, but I mean, it was awesome because so much of this is real new to me. I'm sure it's going to be new to our listeners, but it was really insightful. And she did a great job explaining stuff that, is not something that everybody knows about, right? So I think the important thing is that, lodging professionals, innkeepers, whomever, that they really listen through all this. There's a lot of stuff with what she covered, and it's relevant now and it's becoming more and more relevant. So this is a topic that everybody should really understand and know about. So.
Absolutely. I think you nailed it. I hope you all enjoy this Frictionless Innkeeper podcast with Valerie Stimac, who is a travel blogger with Valerie and Valise. Valerie and Steve, how you both doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks.
Awesome. Steve, how are you doing?
Matt, as usual, I'm doing well. I always wait. Sorry, Valerie. I always wait for our guest to answer first. And then I always wait for Matt to refer to me because he's always like, Steve, how are you? And I'm like, I'm fine, Matt.
Well, you get your own call out. No, that's fine.
His call out really is, as always, I'm doing well. So I'm glad you're doing well.
I'm hanging in there. Yeah.
Cool. Valerie, we're excited to have you. And before we really dive into really the conversation today and the podcast, tell us more about yourself, your background, what you do, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. So I am a classic millennial in that I have had 5 careers already, and I'm only in my mid-30s. I live in Cleveland, but I have lived in a lot of places. Another kind of classic millennial move. Every 2 to 3 years, I'm somewhere new. But my husband and I live in Cleveland, Ohio, and I have been a professional travel blogger for a little over 4 years. I have had my travel blog for almost 9 years at this point, but I wasn't doing it full time as my primary income until the last 4 years. And my background is pretty varied. I have a master's in psychology and a master's in business, and try and bring it all together to run my own business.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, tell us more about your website, Valerie and Valise. What's that all about?
Yeah, Valerie Valise is a travel blog I started in 2013, and it is focused currently on helping people travel better in the American West and Alaska. So I actually grew up in Alaska, and that's one of the primary areas that I write about, but I also cover other Western U.S. destinations. So I was recently in New Mexico for work. Next week, I'm headed to Nevada for work. And that's just helping people get accurate and informative and hopefully entertaining resources to help them plan their trips.
Cool. I was trying to hold off on questions because once I get started here, there's going to be so many of them, I have a feeling. So just from us talking before, it's like, wow, this is such kind of new territory for me anyway. So talk about like you say, okay, I'm a travel blogger and you're a professional travel blogger. So talk about I guess kind of your model, I guess sort of I'm just really curious about what you do and who your clients are or how you get compensated or whatever. And of course, our audience is lodging professionals, mostly independent innkeeper types. So, we want to get to the point where we talk about what's relevant to them and how maybe you can impart some of your knowledge on, to them as to how they can benefit from some of the kinds of things you do. So that's a boatload there. So talk a little bit about your methodology and your clients and how this all works.
Sure. So the core of it is I run a website. And that website makes money primarily through advertising. So I run display ads on my website on all of my articles. And so when you come to my website, you see banner ads on the site, and that helps pay me for the work I do. And then I also make the other majority of my income from what's called affiliate marketing, which means I have a contractual relationship with a company that if I drive them either traffic to their website or sales on their website, I get a commission back. I get paid for that, a small percentage. And those two make up the majority of the income that I earn. And then the other thing that I do that a lot of travel bloggers and influencers do is I work with other companies. So you might hear me use words like destination, brand. Those are kind of the two I use interchangeably. But basically, I would work with a company like a destination or a brand or a property, a hotel property or B&B property or whatever I might be staying at to create content promoting them. And that can also be paid. So I've had relationships where I go on a trip and I produce a bunch of content that could be blog posts, social media posts, emails to my audience, and then I get compensated for all of that.
Okay. So you use social media to kind of get the word out, but your big thing is the blog. Is that right?
Yeah. So that's the main difference I would categorize for people to clarify, because these terms get thrown around. You can say all of us that do this kind of work, which I want to admit, like this job didn't really exist 10 years ago. It's kind of new. You can call anybody who's creating content on the internet a content creator. And then typically the split is blogger, meaning someone who runs a website, and that's the primary way that they make money and their work is primarily written on their website. And influencer, which is someone who's creating social media content and has built an audience there, and they're affecting that audience through the video or photo content. But everybody has influence in that space. So influencer isn't totally an accurate descriptor that sort of like leaves out bloggers. Bloggers have influence, it's just on their blog rather than on social media.
Okay. I guess a lot of times you hear the word social media influencer, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to just an influencer. But like you're saying, you can be a blog influencer as well, right?
Yeah. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So influencer is kind of a broad term that doesn't really clarify what anyone's doing in terms of the work they do or the value they provide to their business partners. But yeah, you can have social media influencers and you can have blog influencers, or bloggers is what we all call ourselves.
So I get the banner ad thing, affiliate marketing. I don't know if it's of any relevance to our listeners, but you want to just kind of clarify what that is?
The best way to explain affiliate marketing is that it's a relationship that I have with a company that pays me when I drive them sales. So a great example is Booking.com, which I'm sure everyone listening has heard of Booking.com. Booking.com has an affiliate program where when I send people through Booking.com and those people book a hotel or an inn or whatever, I get a percentage back paid to me for that, for basically creating that lead and creating that opportunity to make the booking in the first place. So I drive traffic to Booking. Booking gets the sale. Booking.com gets a portion. Usually that's something they negotiate with the property directly. And then Booking.com pay a portion back to me.
Okay. So you might have a banner ad, but it's not Booking.com that's paying you for the ad. It's you trying to drive people to Booking.com. So you get paid per reservation or whatever, right?
Yeah. Usually the difference is banner ads, I'm getting paid for having them visible, and links are, the affiliates are usually hidden in the links. So it might be a link that you click on a website, and that is driving the traffic. And that's sort of where the affiliate relationship comes from.
Okay. And so then the kind of the third big one there, as far as the kind of the revenue or who you work with, is the other companies or whatever, which could be, like you say, destination, brand, hotel, property, B&B property. How does that usually work? I guess most of the time it's probably destination. Is that right? You said you were just in New Mexico, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not going.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So like that one was, who was your client there? Was that the, tourism council or whatever?
Yep. Actually, in that case, it was. So as an influencer, you can work with any company who wants to work with you that you want to work with in return. But in that particular instance, I was working with New Mexico Tourism, and that's the statewide tourism board. And they were then basically negotiating and liaising with the cities that I stayed in. And those cities then worked with the hotels that I stayed in. So it kind of was a very high level partnership for me. And all the work was done to arrange everything within New Mexico and their partners. I have done other partnerships where I work directly with properties. I have done partnerships where I work in the city. I've worked with property conglomerates. So actually one of the ways that I first got into speaking about B&Bs in the first place was I worked with Select Registry on a partnership, and I went and visited several of their properties and wrote a story about millennials needing to stay at B&Bs more. So it can really vary pretty widely who my partner is. It just sort of depends on what makes sense for the trip that I'm planning, or that what the goals are of the partner who might reach out to me.
Okay. So like, since the New Mexico's kind of fresh on your mind, and actually I can relate because I've been there several times. The first ALP, or I guess future ALP conference, was right before COVID in the beginning of 2020 in Albuquerque. So like, you visited Albuquerque, and tell us about this jet set life that you have, this this life of luxury. Hey, I'm going to go have a good time and get compensated for it, right? What's it like? Seriously.
What's it seriously like? Okay. Because it does sound really good and it looks really good on social media, which means we're all doing our jobs correctly, but it's nice, but it's also work. I mean, it is still a job. It's still a career. So usually my days are when I'm on the road. I'll clarify. There's two types of days I have. There's home days, and then there's on the road days. When I'm on the road, it's up usually before sunrise or at sunrise, because that's a great time of day to do photographs. And it gets you out before a lot of the crowds for the day if you're visiting somewhere that's really popular. I'm out, I'm walking, I'm doing sightseeing. I might have museum passes or a meal arranged or something like that. So my whole day is usually taken up doing things that can extend all the way to dinner into the evening if there are evening activities that are arranged or that I want to do in a destination that I'm visiting so that I can write the story I want to write. And then somewhere in there on the road, I'm still trying to keep everything at least floating, or the plates are spinning. They're not falling. They might not be graceful, but that means keeping up on my email. So oftentimes I'm answering emails during my meals because I'm eating often alone. My husband doesn't travel with me on every trip. So I'm either answering emails or I am doing social media, like Instagram stories, or preparing social media posts while I'm having my meals. And then in the evening, whenever that might be, I'm either crashing because I'm exhausted if it was a particularly long day, or I'm coming back and sorting photos, sorting video, maybe putting something together, like outlining a story, taking some notes, storyboarding a video. That's all what you do during the day on the road. So for example, in New Mexico, I didn't get very much quote unquote work done because my days were very long and full of travel related activities. And then when I got home, my days shift where I'm spending, like many people, all my day in front of the computer. I get up in the morning, I sit down, I start working on stories because writing is my most creative task and I can do that first thing in the morning. And then my afternoons are maybe doing a podcast interview like this, or photo editing, video editing, answering emails. That's like 2 half days a week, is just keeping up on all the emails, since that's the main way that business comes to me and that I conduct my business. And then all the other stuff that managing a business requires, like keeping up on my finances and submitting my receipts and following up on invoices to get paid for things. All that's the kind of computer work, which in reality is about 90% of my time. Then I do way more computer work than the fun travel work in my job.
How often, I mean, you don't want to have overload of, right, in terms of posting and blogging and all that stuff. How often are you posting on social channels, Instagram or whatever? I guess if you're actually traveling, then you're posting more because you want to kind of give people real-time info while it's fresh in mind. And these are just short tidbits of info, right? Whereas the writing, you might, I guess you do when you get back home, or you maybe it gets fully formed back home or whatever, but you don't want to be blogging every day or people just tune out, right?
Well, that's an interesting point. Most of the people who find my website find it by Google. So they're not like following me and subscribing to every single thing and reading everything I publish. So I could probably publish every day and nobody would even notice. For example, as we're recording this month that we're in, I'm updating a post every single day. So as part of preparing for post-pandemic travel, all of my articles from before the pandemic need to be checked and updated and just brought up to the new best practices for running a website. So every single day there's quote new content or a new article at the top of my blog, but nobody's reading them all. So they don't get mad about that. You certainly do publish more on social media though. So when I'm traveling, I'm trying to do stories on Instagram 2 to 3 times a day. And then ideally 1 social media post, which would be an Instagram reel or a TikTok or something like that, 1 every single day. But that's a lot when you're on the road because you've got to be, like I said, editing your photos, editing your videos, putting it all together. It's a whole process.
Yeah. And I think there's some relevance about all of that to our listeners, because people might wonder, like, if they want to blog or post about their property, let's say, how often do they do it? And I guess it all depends, but there's got to be, everybody has to find the medium, like, or median or whatever, that's probably right, where you're not overdoing it, but you don't want to be not posting hardly at all, then nobody knows who the heck you are. So yeah.
You can't overdo it, but you can certainly underdo it, which is what most people end up falling into, myself included. There's always more I could be publishing and producing. Can't get through all of the work that I have. But in terms of creating, if you try and run a blog for your property or you're doing social media, you really can't overdo it. The algorithms just love new content. So the more you give, the happier Facebook or Instagram or TikTok is going to be.
So talk about let's say if I'm an innkeeper and I feel like, I don't know, let's say I live kind of out in the boonies somewhere, my properties, or, it might be in a nice, quaint, small town, but I feel like, the town has a lot more to offer than what it gets credit for maybe. And so what we need is some publicity. We need people to learn about our town. So I'm sure there's a lot of different ways to go about it, but that's kind of the big thing that you do. I mean, that's one of the main things, right? When you're talking about your clients who are, destinations or whatever, the whole idea is to try to get people to learn about that area and say, hey, I want to go there, right? And hopefully if you're a property person, I want to stay at that B&B or at a B&B near there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe if I'm an innkeeper, how would I engage with someone like you? I mean, do I just, hey, I'm going to email Valerie and say, hey, come on to my town and write about us? Or how would I go about that?
You can certainly do that. That's always delightful when I don't have to do a bunch of work to get a new lead. But I'm going to step back first and say that before you work with an influencer, the most important thing you can do is look at your business and determine in what ways an influencer or a content creator or a blogger can best provide you value. Because at the end of the day, if you give up a bed to an influencer or blogger, that's a bed that could have been booked by a fully paying customer. Because if you're hosting someone, I've just said it, you're hosting them. So you're covering the cost of them staying at your property. So that means you need to look at and understand your books well enough to say, for example, how many nights per month could we afford to host media of any kind? And that could include blogger, influencer, traditional journalist at a newspaper, whatever, that would still allow us to be profitable as a business or whatever level you operate at. So that's question number one. Question number two is, what outcome would you like to have as the result of having someone come out? So to break it down, there's, as I said, traditional journalists, bloggers, and social media influencers. A traditional journalist is typically going to place a story in a large regional or national publication because that is the direction that travel media has gone. So if you want very high level coverage that might look really good. We were mentioned in the San Francisco Chronicle because we're in California and that's the kind of travel they're covering. That might be valuable to you just to be able to say, we were mentioned in the San Francisco Chronicle, and it might drive you some bookings as well, but probably not, since a lot of people who subscribe to the Chronicle aren't actually in California or aren't looking to travel. They just are subscribers. The next one would be a blogger. So a blogger could come out and create a blog post about a property or the town that you're in, and that will raise awareness with their audience, which will come back to how you should screen influencers or bloggers to make sure that they're actually the right people to work with. But if you've done the screening properly, they'll raise awareness with an audience that's already interested in your area or your property specifically. And then if you bring on a social media influencer, they're going to be promoting you to an audience on the internet that is very wide and varied, because that's how Instagram and Facebook and TikTok work. You get followers from everywhere in the world, all over. So you're going to be getting maybe more awareness for your property, but it may not translate into bookings the same way that bringing out a blogger or traditional journalist might. So all that to say, you want to think about what your goals are before you just go and start hosting people, because one, it's costing you money, and two, it needs to meet whatever goals you have for your business, which is usually, I would assume, heads and beds. That's the high level of making the decision. And then you want to screen the person. I just sort of alluded to that. You want to make sure you understand who they are, what kind of content they create, and who they normally reach. So again, a social media influencer has a very different audience profile in terms of their demographics than a blogger might. And we have very different tools that we use to determine that. So as a blogger, I use Google Analytics. On my Instagram, I use Instagram's Insights, which is totally different. It's like, I can't even compare the data because they're not even the same kind of tool. But you want to make sure that if you're bringing someone out, that they are going to have access to an audience you want to reach. So when I go to Alaska, for example, because I write about Alaska all the time. My audience is highly interested in Alaska. For me, partnerships up there make a ton of sense to me and my partners because my audience already wants what they are offering, whatever. It doesn't even matter what it is. I can go anywhere and do anything, and there'll be people who are interested in it because it's in Alaska. But if I were to go to, say, Memphis, Tennessee, which I have been to, and I've worked with them, it's a lot more complicated of a thing for me to message to my audience in an effective way because my audience isn't really interested in Memphis for me. There are other people they go to who they trust for Memphis advice. So you want to just make sure you screen and understand what kind of audience you're getting access to, what your goals are, and whether the person you are reaching out to or being offered to host is actually going to help you achieve what you want from that partnership.
Yeah. And when we talked before, you had said there can be, I guess, micro influencers, right? There's kind of different levels, right? Not everybody's a Beyonce or an Oprah or whatever. I don't know what kind of, in the travel world, I don't even know who that might be, who the star is or whatever. But because it's all about your destination, didn't you say that there can be people like you focus on Alaska, right? And the people who already know you that are coming to your website or reading your blog or whatever, they're looking for content about Alaska a lot, right? So whereas others, I think you talked about someone, I think in the Seattle area is more of maybe they live there and they write a lot about it, blog a lot about it or whatever. And I think you were saying that maybe it's better, if you're in that area, there's a couple different ways you can go about this. If you really you think engaging with an influencer is the way to go, talk about what your suggestions would be. Cause I think it was like, hey, well, first off, try to minimize your costs, right? So you might want to go to your local chamber or whomever and try to partner up. And then you're going to have to figure out who to work with, who's best going to get the word out about your area, right?
Yeah. I would say there's two ways to get started working with influencers, especially if you want to be cost conscious, and every business owner wants to be cost conscious. First, you could directly reach out to influencers either in your area or what we call micro influencers, which is anywhere beneath like 10,000 followers on most platforms. And especially if they're in your area, and just see if they want to come feature your property on whatever channel they use, whether that's a blog or social media. That's a great way to get started because then you're working directly with the influencer and you can negotiate the entire terms of the relationship together. The other way you could go about it is you could reach out to either your chamber of commerce, if you have one of those, or your county or your state tourism board, and let them know you're interested in hosting influencers in exchange for coverage. And that puts some of the questions and cost concerns onto that tourism board in terms of screening influencers, deciding on the goals, because usually they're the ones going out and liaising with influencers and bloggers like me. That's how I ended up working with New Mexico. Was I went to a conference and met one of their representatives. And so the properties that I stayed at didn't have to negotiate with me about how many nights or anything like that. The city, so the city of Santa Fe negotiated with the hotel, and then New Mexico negotiated with Santa Fe, and they all came to an agreement on what I would have. And I just got to go have a great trip and didn't have to do all the details. I just worked directly with New Mexico. So what you can do as a property to get started is go to that local board or the local list board you have and say, we are open to hosting media in 2023 or 2024. Please add us to your list, and we'd love to review people when you have them who might be coming through our area. That kind of takes the pressure off of you. You don't have to do any screening. You don't have to do any outreach. You've already done the cost calculation and you know how many people you could host that year, but you're not doing all the heavy lifting of ensuring that they're going to be a quality creator and what deliverables and all the other activities and their transit and, all these other things that go into making a trip happen. So those are the two ways I do it. I either work locally with smaller influencers to get your feet wet doing it directly, or partner with your local tourism board or chamber of commerce to have them help carry some of the burden of working with an influencer.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And just to talk a little bit more about kind of what you do, when you go to a destination, and of course, with our app, we're all about guest experience and experience off property predominantly, right? What is there to do? How do I live like a local? How does your guest live like a local? So is that predominantly what you're doing, is going out and restaurants? I mean, you have an itinerary that's given to you pretty much to say, we want you to go to this place or we want you to go to this festival and blog about that? Or how much do you decide to kind of go off the cuff and just do on your own and write about?
Yeah, great question. The answer is unsatisfactory. It depends on what the partner, whatever business partner I have, like the destination or the hotel, have what we've agreed to, right? So there have been properties I've worked with where I go out and I'm focused just on them and I eat at their on-site restaurant and like, it's all about them. That's what we've agreed to do. And that's what I'm going to experience and create. There's other places where I go and I have a hotel arranged and I have a car arranged and then a whole bunch of suggestions and a free media pass to get me into anywhere I want to go. And then I choose what I think I'm interested in and my audience will be interested in. And then I will say, I always overwork myself. I always do more in a destination than I'm ever recommended to do. So I usually am too busy to do a ton of research in advance, which is why it's nice to have a little bit of guidance from my partners. But then I get on the ground and I see something that interests me and I go on Google and I learn more about it. And then I see what other things there are to do in the area. And before you know it, I'm off doing my own thing. And often that's at my own cost because it's something that caught my attention, which is how everyone travels, which is, I think that's part of what works for me and my audience is that they know, even though I do have partnerships, I'm still going out and spending money and traveling like a normal person. I'm not just like jet setting and getting everything paid for.
So out of curiosity, how do you learn about beyond what you're told to do? Like you say, you do some research and all of that. How often do you talk to innkeepers to where you're staying, to people who, responsible for where you're staying and get information? And I mean, our app is what provides the information, right? So you could plan your trip beforehand if they say, hey, go to the app and then start planning now. How do you get your information as a traveler? And, is it mostly word of mouth? Are you running into apps like ours or seeing those or what?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say I have gotten more laissez-faire in my own travel style and that I don't too often have I remember when I first started traveling about a decade ago and I had like a 8-page document with like every single activity I was going to do, right? And I'd done all the research in advance. I'm not that way anymore, but people are along a spectrum. So I don't want to speak for anyone else in the way they travel, but typically I have a rough idea when I hit the ground somewhere and that's about all I have. And then I am either asking for advice of locals or seeking it on my own. So I love to do self-guided walking tours in places. That's one of my little things that I just get so excited. I'm like, oh, a little self-guided walking tour. Let's go do that. Because you're going to see so much more than just whatever points of interest are. And then checking in with whoever I'm checking in with at a hotel or a bellhop, whatever kind of accommodation I might be staying at. So for example, when I was in Taos, I arrived later than I was expecting to arrive. And I didn't eat dinner. And I was just like, I just want something kind of like a nightcap. And I don't mean like a drink. I just want something to like wrap up my day. And so when I was checking into the property I was staying at, I said, hey, because they have a bar and restaurant on their property. It was still open. And I said, hey, if I could eat one thing on your menu, what would it be? And they recommended the green chili cheesecake chimichanga, which if you know Taos, you now know where I'm talking about. But it was just nice to have someone recommend something. And then the next night I was at dinner and I'm sitting at the bar alone because when you're traveling solo, you often end up stuck at the bar. And this other solo dining patron came in and sat down and ordered his dinner. And we started chatting and he recommended, oh, when you leave tomorrow, take this road, not that road. And so it is kind of it's like word of mouth, but it's usually from the spontaneity of just talking with people. So at the end of the day, the best advice you can always get is just ask people. And I guess the worst they would say is, I'm not from here, or I don't know, or we have an app for that, right? Like we put all this in the app. We don't have to ask your question. Look at this cool app that we have. And that's like the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is you learn something fantastic that you never would have known about. And that's even if you're not then going to go and write about it on your blog.
Yeah, that's cool. Now, you also had talked about how you create all this content, but you sometimes are disappointed that you don't feel like it's leveraged by those who are compensating you to create it, right? Like, okay, you created it, well, share it or whatever, right? I mean, talk about, so that way, if, our listeners end up engaging and it could be that they've been a part of this, like you say, a media person, whatever the media is. So it could be that they've done this before and maybe they're like, I didn't get anything out of it. Well, maybe it's because you didn't leverage the assets that came from the person who was doing this, right? So talk about what was frustrating you and how that might be improved by others, Yeah,
absolutely. This is one of my pet peeves. And I say that in the nicest way possible as a professional who wants to keep getting work in the industry for anyone listening is I go and I do all this work. Well, first of all, I go and you spend money for me to be there, or you forfeit money is probably the better way to say it. In every case, whether or not you're additionally paying the influencer or blogger or not, or you're just comping them, you're forfeiting money from another guest potentially. I do all my work, which I get compensated in the ways we've already discussed. Great, I got paid. But I would love to see more partners share the content that I and my fellow creators create in the first place. If we do all the work for you, it was for you, and you don't share it, it's this weird, mystifying thing. And I'm like, well, I can't make you share it, but it's kind of silly that you did all that work and you didn't share it. So what would sharing look like? Let's talk about that. If you're using a social media platform, it means resharing whatever you get tagged in. As long as it's good, obviously don't share bad quality stuff, but you're hiring an influencer or content creator, they're probably creating pretty good stuff. So resharing it, putting it on your stories, putting it on your feed, putting a link to it on your website. Hey, we were just featured by this blogger. Check out their review of staying with us and visiting our community or whatever piece they created. And then the one that always gets me is I know email is one of those weird things that everyone knows they should send more. So you probably have an email list for your property. You're not emailing in part because you don't even know what to send them. Well, if you had bloggers or influencers come out and say, send them the links, send them the Instagram or the blog links and say, hey, look at these amazing photos or look at this great story that includes us because that's what you paid for. That's what you forfeited money for. So it's just one of those things that I want to be like, I did it for you. Just do it. And it's not, it doesn't really, I mean, it does, obviously, let's be realistic. It does help me, right? If you send people to my website, I earn more ad revenue, right? But that's not what I'm doing it because I think that's the final piece of me creating this content, me sharing it, you sharing it. Everyone knows about it. Isn't that lovely? And we both get benefits because I'm raising awareness for you. You're getting more content to share. You're getting bookings from me and I'm getting more awareness for my brand. All of that makes everyone happy. And I think that's part of why, aside from not correctly screening and not correctly having goals for your influencer before you agree to work with them, that's the third piece that leaves companies of any kind dissatisfied with these partnerships, is that they don't feel like they got anything out of it. And the only way you should feel that way is if the influencer did not do what they were supposed to do and deliver the content. And then you have other things you can usually respond with.
Yeah.
If they created content, you should absolutely share it. It's made for you to share. It's made for me to share. It's made for you to share.
No, I totally get where you're coming from. I feel the same way with our app, with the Frictionless Guest App. It's like, I want people to use it, not, sure, it'd be nice to make money, but it's like we've gone through, we've been building this thing for like 8 years, and so many iterations and talking to people and, how best to make this work. It's like, you don't want to create something and then have it die on the vine, right? You just want people to use it, feel like, okay, I did something useful for people, right? So,
well, and especially if we're working with innkeepers and they've added all that local knowledge and value, and then they don't share with their guests. Like that would be the one that I'm like, but you did all that work. It's the same as hosting someone. You as the innkeeper did all that work and you should get the benefit of that by giving it to the people, like putting it in front of your audience or putting it in front of your prospective guests and having them get value from it too.
Right. Now, one of the things with like you say, maybe a property owner says, well, I didn't get anything out of that. Talk a little bit about attribution and how you're able to, when you work with a client, do you give them reports kind of after the fact that says, okay, after my blog, within the first month, here's how many clicks and whatever. I mean, what kind of analytics do you actually provide that, or do they have to see it for themselves by traffic coming to them, or how does that work?
Yeah, great question. I will admit this is something I could be better at, but it's also not something that I feel a lot of people ask for. So I almost want more partners to be like, part of your deliverables is a report at the end, because I do all the work and then I don't deliver a report, but they also didn't ask for it. Anyway, absolutely. Any influencer or content creator or blogger worth their weight can provide you with metrics, and they should provide you with metrics, and you should ask for that as part of the negotiation. Even if it's just screenshots of the screens that they have access to, and it's not like a full pretty PDF or whatever, that is something that everyone has access to. So when I do provide reports, which makes me think I should write some right now, I would provide traffic, absolutely, because traffic for me is the bread and butter. I'm a website, so traffic is my bread and butter. I could provide insights if I chose to set up their links to their property as affiliate links. I can very easily get more attribution data on actual bookings driven, but that may not be something that you want as an innkeeper. You may want me to point people directly to you, in which case I cannot clearly see if I'm driving you traffic or not. Just the way Google works, I can't really see people leaving my site to go somewhere else. I can only see them coming to my site. And then the affiliate links allow me to track. Anyway, I could potentially provide you with booking data that takes a little while to get enough that it's actually going to be momentum. I can provide you with open rates on my emails, click rates on my emails. I can show you how many impressions I got on social media. All that is data you could ask for based on your goals. That's kind of where we go back to, is determine what your goals are and then ask the influencer or the content creator or blogger to give that back to you.
But because you are a blogger, you've got more ability than if you were, you do promote on social media, but it's more clear cut to be able to say, hey, this is how many people had clicked on, or at least read the blog and possibly drove traffic to your site or whatever, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can give you really granular data on how many people came to that particular page. If you wanted, I could set something up where it says how far down the page they got. I can track clicks on the page. That's all a little bit more advanced, but it's all possible. And it's just a matter of partners asking for it and then the influencer or blogger delivering on that report.
Any stories or I don't want to put you on the spot here, but if I'm trying to convince the innkeeper, the property owner, that this is worthwhile, in case they're like, what is this, social or, blog influencer or, travel influencer or whatever. What is this all about? Hopefully, I think you've explained it pretty well, but if they're all just saying, okay, well, that's a great idea, but it doesn't apply to me. Can you cite any clients that you've had, whether it's a property or a destination or whatever, where they were like, wow, you've really made a difference in terms of something that's somewhat measurable?
Yeah, great question. The property that I would particularly point to, I would say they haven't had a ton of booking, partly because they're in California. So before I lived in Cleveland, I lived in California, and California has had incredibly strict lockdowns for the last 2 years. And I visited this property during or right before the pandemic. It was like my first trip has no masks in it. And then I went a return trip to the area and shot more photos. So there's some with masks and some without, which is kind of funny. But this property, they just really delighted me, and they took care of basically kind of everything. So they took care of my accommodation. They upgraded me to what they call the Stargazer package, which is something they offer all their guests. So it wasn't anything that they didn't already do, but it was just, they were like a little surprise and delight extra. And then they covered my meals on property, and they had fantastic food. So we ate there almost every meal. And in the end, I loved it so much that what I would point to for them is, okay, I haven't driven as many bookings. I've driven one booking in the last year, but I also feel like, California has been a lot harder for people to travel in. I was supposed to deliver on one blog post, which I did. So I wrote one blog post about visiting the area and mentioned them explicitly as this is where you should stay. And then I added them to 7 more blog posts. So they are splashed all over. When I mentioned that region, I mentioned them as the place to stay. And so they get a lot more exposure, which is more like what a social media influencer does in terms of like just putting it in front of people. It hasn't materialized quite the way I was hoping in terms of bookings, but I think that they still feel very satisfied in the fact that I'm not recommending them. Like I've way over recommended them in every place that I could think to put them. That may just be a matter of the way people are traveling right now, or the way they're spending right now as we're heading into a recession. So maybe not as much on the deliverable side of actual bookings, but I also wasn't contracted to create bookings. I was contracted to create content, and I over delivered on that. And I like to think that they feel satisfied with that result.
Yeah, I'm sure. And that just brought on another question. If you've got a blogger, a travel influencer, whomever, coming to stay with you, how do you treat them? They're kind of like, you're kind of the client, but the reality is that it seems to me it's similar to the old food critic, right? it seems like I remember old sitcoms where the food critic would come into the restaurant and I don't know, the restaurant would botch things but they were always like whispering, oh, that's the food critic or whatever. I mean, you don't want to be fake about, what you provide, but I would want Valerie to be wooed while she's at my property because I want her to write good things and I want to give her a good experience just like any other guest, right?
Right. You want to balance that. So the best way to think about it is you want the person to have an accurate experience,
right?
But you have some flexibility within how that accuracy looks. So the best thing you can do is what I just kind of mentioned in the example I gave, where they upgraded me to a package they already offer. So it was an extra little something, but they already offer it. So it wasn't like I showed up and got something no one else ever gets and no one else ever will get. I got something that guests can choose to upgrade and pay extra for. And that little bit extra was extra surprise and delight for me. That said, I guess I'm sort of torn on whether or not you want to let the whole staff know that you've got a VIP, because that's basically what you want to think of a media person as. You want them to have a great experience, but you want it to be accurate, but it should be a great experience. The best experiences I've ever had at accommodations are where they didn't know who I was and something went wrong, and watching how they handled that. If you are confident in your staff and they treat every guest wonderfully and they treat every guest like the VIP that they should, you don't necessarily need to tell them. If you want to make sure that they treat this person as a VIP or give everyone a reminder, this week we're going to have a member of the media coming. I expect you all to be treating all guests as VIPs because I'm not going to tell you who it is. However you want to handle that, that makes sense for your business. It is also really nice to arrive and be like, oh, Valerie, we're so glad to have you. But I like to think that innkeepers are always striving for their guests to have that experience anyway. So It's a good chance to kind of push you to step up the bar if you're kind of not at the level you want to be at.
Yeah, makes sense. Totally. Yep. All right. Matt's getting ready to reel me in here. I mean, we've talked about so many. It's just been really enlightening, fascinating, really awesome. I do want to throw one more thing in there. I guess it's not really a question, but the way that we found out about you is you're going to be and I don't know if we're going to air this prior to, but in less than a month, you're going to be at the Michigan Bed and Breakfast Association. You're going to be talking there, and I'll be there on behalf of the Frictionless Guest App. So we want to kind of give the MBBA a plug for that in case anybody hears this and says, hey, I want to go. And I look forward to seeing you there. I think it's November, I want to say 1st and 2nd or 2nd and 3rd. It's the first week in November. I think it's Monday through Wednesday, something like that. And what are you going to be talking about there real quick?
Yeah, at that talk, I will be discussing how to make sure your property is appealing to all kinds of generations. So we have, in the last few years, during a pandemic, seen an entire new generation emerge from a technological standpoint, Gen Z. They are now traveling. They are now spending money on travel. And we're going to talk about how you can make bed and breakfasts appealing, what you should be doing to make all generations aware of what you offer and help encourage them to come stay with you in a safe and fun way.
Awesome. Cool. I'm looking forward to hearing that for sure. Matt, man, I just kind of blew through all of this, didn't I? Sorry.
No, I
didn't even get a chance to even topic. You didn't even get a chance to say, okay, thanks, or hey, I'm still here, but you are here.
No, I'm still here. No, this was a great conversation. And Valerie, it's a pleasure to have you here because this is definitely one of our more different podcasts that we've done. And this might be our 51st or 52nd podcast. So we've been doing this for a few years now. Never spoken to an influencer like yourself or somebody that shares how innkeepers can leverage influencers. And this is really super cool. And, before we sign off today, are there any parting shots or anything we may have missed?
No, I would just love to connect with anyone who's interested in learning more. And I don't mean pitch me to come stay at your property. If you want to just talk about influencers and you're curious about whether it might make sense for you, or I said something that maybe wasn't totally clear, you can obviously leave a review for the podcast. I'll put in that plug. And the guys will let me know that I should come back and answer some questions. We could do an FAQ or something. But you can also reach out to me via my website. I have my email on there, my contact page. And the way to reach me is Valise Mag, VALISE, M as in Mike, AG, valisemag.com. Or you could just search Valerie Stimac and I pop up because I have a really unique name. So if you want to talk about influencers, if you're curious about hosting influencers, if you want someone to put together a weird set of deliverables and see if it makes sense for your business, I'd be happy to do that for people to have an example. of what a set of deliverables for a blogger might look like. And then they have that as a benchmark. Happy to chat with anybody who's interested, because this is not a part of your business that you can ignore. That's what I'll say. This is not going away. Influencers are a very viable part of the travel industry, and it is important for you to consider how that fits into your business strategy. And if you want to participate in that, come up with a way that makes sense for your business.
Yeah, important and timely to have you on. And by the way, how does Valise you do all the work pretty much, and then his name ends up on the domain, on the URL? What is that all about? Valise Mag?
So it's actually a nickname. It's something that I started the site before I even met him, and we're really early dating in the first few years of running the site. And he said, I'm going to be Mr. Valise. And I was like, that's just going to confuse everyone. So technically, to explain the name, a valise is a suitcase. It's the French word for suitcase, or the English name for a weekend bag. And I used to write about weekend travel. That's why I say now I focus on American West, because I didn't used to always focus on that. And the idea was I traveled with my valise and wrote about it. That's obviously changed a lot. So I actually usually call him Mr. B, just to make it all simple. His name's Jacob. It's nothing to do with it.
I didn't know that's what valise meant. You say it's French for suitcase. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my wife will tell our boys, we have 2 teenagers, but with more when they were younger, she would say I guess it's Steel Magnolias, I loved you more than my luggage. So hopefully you love valise more than valise.
Yes, I do. One of the valise is in the storage room next to my office, and it's not my husband. So there you go.
Okay. All right. Pull me out of the hole I've dug us into, Matt.
You got it. I'll take us out. This has been awesome. And this concludes this Frictionless Innkeeper podcast interview with Valerie Stimac, who is a travel blogger with Valerie Valise, as you heard. And Valerie was kind enough to share her insights into how hospitality providers can really best work with travel influencers. And it's really an opportunity for many, many hospitality providers to be the owners. And our podcast is brought to you by the Frictionless Guest App, which helps improve your guest stay without adding more to your day. Learn how at frictionlessguest.com. And Valerie and Steve, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Valerie. We appreciate it. Definitely. Take care.